Jesus asked two questions at the beginning of this gospel. Who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am? Hold those questions for just a moment. Yesterday we commemorated the 20th anniversary of the tragedy that took place by a group of terrorists determined that they would take two airplanes, two commercial airliners, and crash them into the Twin Towers in New York City, another plane crashing into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and a fourth plane which reportedly was headed for the U.S. Capitol, but because some of the passengers on that plane realized what was happening, they overcame the terrorists and were able to control the plane enough that crashed in Pennsylvania in an open, grassy field. What a senseless tragedy. Made absolutely no sense. On that day, we saw the darkest side of humanity. But we also saw, we got a glimpse of the brightest side of humanity. The darkest side in the terrorists, and the brightest side in all of the first responders, some of whom gave their lives to try to save others. Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? The terrorists certainly would have had no clue how to answer that question. Or if they did, it made no difference to them. But the responders, the first responders, may not have verbalized any answers, but their actions surely showed what they were all about. That tragedy has lived with us for 20 years. It changed so many lives. Something a little less than 3,000 people died because of that tragedy. 3,000, almost 3,000 lives stamped out for no reason whatsoever. Because of hatred. Because of hatred. Not a good situation. But the loved ones and the friends of those who died, they still suffer. Oh, maybe it's not as painful as it was those first few days and weeks and months and even years right after, but they still suffer. And that whole incident really affected all of us in another way. All we have to do is look at the amount of anxiety that it created. Look at all of the security procedures that we go through nowadays to keep ourselves safe from something like that happening again, hopefully. It affected all of us. Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? When the disciples were asked that question, they knew he was not John the Baptist. They knew he was not Elijah or one of the other prophets. It was Peter who said, "You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, the Anointed One." But even Peter didn't understand what he was saying, because as we read on in the gospel, Jesus rebuked him. He did not understand. He didn't understand what Jesus was going to have to go through and why he would have to go through that. Peter answered that question, but perhaps we ought to ask ourselves, how do I answer those questions, especially the second one? Who do you say that I am? And the question for us is, do our lives mirror what we're called to be? Do we really understand what Christ did for us and what he asks us to do for one another and for our own salvation? There was much suffering after the 9/11 incidents. It continues, as I mentioned earlier, even today. At the close of the gospel today, Jesus talks about us taking up our crosses and following him. That's not easy. That's not very inviting. That's not very appealing. Even Jesus, in his human nature, in the garden, Father, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will be done. Suffering is so hard to understand, but it's one of the mysteries of our faith. One of the mysteries of our faith. If we want to be true followers of Jesus Christ, we must be willing to take up our crosses and follow him. In 2015, Pope Francis came to Ground Zero in New York, and he joined in a prayer service. And he had a prayer that he gave, and this is an excerpt from some of that prayer. O God of love, compassion, and healing, look on us who gather today on this hallowed ground, the scene of unspeakable violence and pain. Give eternal light and peace to all who died here. Bring healing to those who continue to suffer from injuries and illnesses. Heal, too, the pain of still grieving families and all who lost loved ones in this tragedy. Comfort and console us. Strengthen us in hope, and give us the wisdom and the courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among all nations and in the hearts of all people. Amen.